welcome back to Take Me Back. This is episode 8, and I am here with a very good friend of mine, Lee Delfausse. We became friends as fellow authors, and she has been coming with her family since, 67 years, since 1956?
You got it, but that's when we started skiing here and bought a house, but we actually were commuters in 1949 when Mad River opened. We got on the first single chairlift ride. I think I must have gone up with my father's lap because I was pretty young. But so I could even say we started coming in 49.
In 49, right after it opened. So if you skied as a very young child, do you remember who taught you?
Oh, my parents taught me. And I'd have to say it was the chute at Mad River Glen that taught me how to ski.
You didn't start on the chute?
No, but very quickly gravitated to it. And I never even got to train gates or anything until I was about 14 or 15. So running the chute nonstop on the left-hand side going down is where I learned to ski moguls and adapt to adversity. And I would ski it nonstop, so I'd get in shape.
So this intrigues me because my two older sons skied on the race team at Mad River, and John, at that time, was the youngest kid they'd ever had on the race team. I think he was 4, if I'm remembering correctly. So did they have a team?
No, there were no teams. I had no coaches at all. When I just trained. We came up on weekends. My first coach I got was about when I was 13. He was a friend called Al Seiss, and the Masters race is called the Seiss Cup. So Al would take me to junior races. But again, I never practiced on any slalom courses or anything because there was no ski academy. So I really didn't get a lot of training until probably about 1961 or 2. And I'd go up at Christmas time to Gunstock Mountain and train with Penny Patu. And so that's when I first got my really good, serious coaching.
And when you were doing the children's races, where did you travel to do the races?
The junior races were all over the East. We'd go to Stowe. We'd go to Wildcat. We would race at, trying to think, Ascutney, some of the smaller areas. We had races up here. So we would just travel on weekends to the races. Instead of coming up to our ski house here, we would just take off for 5 hours in the car to a ski race.
How many kids?
Just 2 of us. My friend Sally Seiss and I were the only 2 going. And my father would drive sometimes and help us, or Al Seiss would go with us. Al was a master waxer, so I was happy to have him coming to the downhill races because he knew how to put wax on and how to pick it better than anyone.
Well, we should get right to the spoiler because people need to understand how far your skiing career went.
Well, I was so lucky with the skiing career because I finished up with the junior races in New England, and I made the junior nationals for a couple of years, went out to Whitefish, Montana. I came in 4th in the junior nationals. And then I was recruited by Middlebury College. So I went to Middlebury, and that's when I really first got my training because we skied every day at Middlebury. It turned out that the admission director, Fred Newberger, was also the ski coach. So my friend Sally Seiss and I both went to Middlebury. So I trained and I won all the carnivals and everything in the East. And then I was invited out to, I did well in a post-Olympic race in '64 when the Olympic team came back. They were all tired and I was young and ready to go. So I beat many of them in the post-Olympic race, and Bob Yaddy then picked me up for the U.S. ski team. So I went out to Bend, Oregon, and then fortuitously I met a man called Dave McCoy who owned Mammoth Mountain and invited me out there, all expenses paid. So I got 4 years at Mammoth as a protege of Dave McCoy.
Wow.
And that took me to the U.S. ski team in the World Cup races.
I know, which every time you say it, it just makes me smile. Because I'm not an athlete, and I haven't known you as an athlete. I know you as a writer and an educator of literature and writing. So it's just amazing to me. In fact, we should probably talk about the books. Maybe hold the covers up, and then do you want to read your back cover?
Sure.
So people we can get oriented to the fact that Lee has taken this incredible skiing career and written authentic books about ski racing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I do encourage young people now to realize that they're starting to write their story as they start to explore the world. Not that they will put it down. It took me years to put it all together, but the first novel that I did finish up was called Snow Sanctuary. And that's where my character, Leah Erickson, joins the U.S. ski team and travels the world. So I wanted to explain to people what it's like to be a World Cup ski racer, the training that goes into it, the dangers that you confront. If you want, I can read you the back cover.
I would love
to it because I'll put this one down for a second. It sort of explains everything. So avalanches, injury, paralysis, death, loneliness, all part of international ski racing, are predictable dangers compared with the corruption of coaches. Leah Erickson learns how to grapple with these challenges in her ski journey through the Sierra Nevadas and the European Alps, eventually gaining courage from her teammates and herself. So that pretty much sums it up. A young girl, not exposed to the world, who has to confront all this adversity and gain strength in herself. So it was fun to write. I would have to say probably 80% of it is autobiographical. So that was easy to write.
That was the next question. I know if you're watching on television or listening on the radio, I know that's what people want to know, is how much is true.
And about 80 or 90%, and the stories that I didn't experience, I garnered from my friends on the team. So I was able to add even more stories. And so I'd have to say most of it is based on some kind of fact. And, you know, it was exciting to write it. I love writing about skiing. There were some hard times on the ski team, as every athlete knows, whether it's your training or maybe it's a confrontation with a teammate or with a coach. And I found I was almost crying at times when I wrote it because I was bringing back memories that maybe I didn't want to confront again. But when it was all said and done, I felt really good. It was a catharsis.
How about the other book?
Oh, okay. So
let's show that cover. And
okay, so I finished Snow Sanctuary, and I traveled around reading it, going to book clubs, and everybody said, "Great, we love the story." We had no idea how hard it was to be a competitive athlete in skiing, but what happened to your character? So without ruining the first book, I did write the second book called No Sanctuary Here. And this novel covers the time when the athlete, Leah, is recuperating from a very serious injury. And most ski racers have experienced injury. It's just, I don't want to call it a game, it's part of the sport. You're throwing yourself out in some very difficult situations. So I wrote No Sanctuary Here, what it's like to be rehabbing from a serious injury, and also gaining the strength again, Kathy, to go back out there and compete, because you have to believe in yourself again. You can't go out there feeling that you're vulnerable.
So it isn't just the physical strength, it's the emotional strength.
Absolutely. And, you know, obviously good coaching helps. Positive teammates are certainly important, and supportive parents are very important, because you have to do it. I think of Lindsey Vonn, or somebody who came back from so many injuries and came back stronger. But she knew the risk she was taking when she came back. So I wrote a whole book just about coming back to that and she found herself by basically going into difficult situations. She took maybe you want me to read it. Leah, autobiographically me, came back here to Waitsfield, and I got a job working in the fire tower on Scrag Mountain. So I could earn enough money to take the train across Canada to go back to California. So I learned what it was like to live on your own in the mountains. And then I met a friend who took me hiking and climbing in the Wind Rivers for 2 weeks with backpacks in the wilderness, gained even more confidence. And then Leah got involved with going down to Washington, D.C. and working there, just going down, getting a job. And so she took on adversity, excuse me, and discovered the strengths that she had in herself.
So take your sip of water, because we do want you to read. Lee and I have been doing a library tour in the state of Vermont. And so we hear each other speak often, because it's just the two of us, usually. And I love this particular passage.
Okay, so you want me to read about Scrag Mountain?
Yeah,
okay.
Love it.
And maybe some of the people listening know about Scragg Mountain. It is over in the Northfield Ridge, and so the job...
Is the fire tower still there?
No,
Okay.
They took it down. The cabin is still there that I lived in. So you can climb up and find that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see where we'll start. The chapter is chapter 9 in No Sanctuary Here. It's called Home. Home, of course, Waitsfield, Vermont. And so Leah decides the first thing she wants to do when she's back is to go hiking. And so there's a trail called Palmer Road right up that takes you right up to the top of Scragg at that point. And she knew she was going to have a job up there, so she wanted to experience it. So she decides to go up the mountain, and she climbs up, and here's where she starts. Up through the pasture I go, passing our spring, surrounded by red staghorn sumacs, and cross into the orchard where our apples are ripening. A Macintosh apple hangs low, tempting me, so I snag it and take a bite of the bitter, hard flesh. Then I throw it toward the stream, where it can become a new tree. When I stop to pick a bouquet of black-eyed Susans, goldenrod, and Queen Anne's lace, 2 black and white Oreo heifers, almost full size, thunder towards me, heads lowered, heels kicking. I'm forced to jump a stone wall and crawl under the barbed wire fence. I lie in the unmown grass laughing at the snorting noses that reek of wet grass and taunt them. Good fences make good neighbors. Back on my feet, I brush off the nettles while I'm singing a rendition of Frost's poem, The Pasture, by Randall Thompson. It was a song my high school chorus director, Miss Loring, taught us. I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait to watch the water clear. I may. I shan't be gone long. You come too. I'm going to fetch the little calf that's standing by the mother. It's so young. It totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be gone long. You come too. Following a logging road stitched to the mountainside, I stop at the granite cellar hole of an old farmhouse, whose inhabitants probably deserted during the 1929 Depression, perhaps dreaming of the fertile California farmlands. A large pine tree stands sentry in the middle, revealing the age of the ruins, 40-plus years. A sugar house, its metal roof collapsing from the snow loads, sits next to a grove of maples. Inside the tin sap buckets, neatly stacked next to the metal boiler, awaiting the farmer's return. In the back, 2 untended gravestones tell of the family's sorrows. I kneel to pull the leaves and grass away to find the names of Edward and Alice Jocelyn. They were twins who were born in 1913 and died in 1918 at the age of 5. Sadly, one died 25 days after the other. These were 2 children who could have passed away from the Spanish influenza, as my father used to tell me. I scamper around a large witness tree marking the boundary of the national forest and up a dark stream thread. The water courses down the mountain, rests in steep terraces, throbs over falls, and jumps around logs and rounded boulders. Its preternatural flow comes from an underground aquifer, touted to be the largest in Vermont. I decide to run up the middle of the brook, ricocheting while trying to land on the flattest rocks, often getting my hiking boots wet. My moves are as quick as a dragonfly, collecting bugs, flitting, hovering. Each step takes me farther from my past fears. Yet, unfortunately, I still worry about my future. Do I really want to become part of the most divisive protest movement in America? With each stride, I grow more emboldened, confident, remembering that I'd risked everything by reporting 2 predatory ski team coaches. In the same vein, I recall the 2 race podiums I'd stood on last winter as the best skier in America. Midway, I stop to lie on my back and look up into the maple trees, their branches corkscrewing toward the sky, while their 3-pointed leaves store sugar for the long winter. I think, I'm like them, building reserves for the upcoming winter.
Your writing just slays me. You know it. The images that you evoke are so vivid. I can just see it as I'm reading your work or listening to you read it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for letting me read it. I love the woods in Vermont. I love our forests. I've spent time in California and the dry desert, and nothing compares to the forests that we have here. The diversity of the vegetation, the animals. And so to live on top of a mountain for weeks at a time It was so I mean, you just blended into nature.
What did you do for food?
I would truck it up. I'd go down once a week and load up on food. We had a cook stove there, so I could heat up my meals. I lived with the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. So it was, and running up and down the mountain was great training. So I just lugged my food up there, live for a week.
That's
and
so
come
cool.
down. Yeah.
I'd love to go back a little bit farther. When you were a child and you got the house on the common room, which you still have, and that was 1956 when you started going there. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
In terms of our lives on the common road?
Absolutely.
Well, we came from Concord, Mass., and this was before the interstates. So we drove a route called Route 3. Maybe some people have driven that road. It's a windy road. It goes up through New Hampshire and then cuts across. I think we went over to Springfield, Vermont, came up through Granville Gap. So on the weekends there, we bought the house with 2 other families. And I mentioned in my article about it that we paid $3,000, which my father thought was a lot of money then.
I'm just going to let the viewers know that Lee wrote one of the Take Me Back articles. Our local paper does Take Me Back, the articles. It's a column. And we've extended it here to live interviews. So she's written about this, but that's okay.
So I wrote about what it was like to live. And for us, it was such a novelty to come up here and live in a basically 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom and then a whole attic that had bunk beds. There were 9 kids. Each family had 3 kids and 6 adults. So do the math. 15 of us in this house. And it was heated with a big, I guess what you call a furnace, pot-bellied furnace down the basement. So when we arrived in December, somebody went in, loaded up the furnace, and heated up the house.
With wood.
With wood, yeah. We heated with wood. And the kids all had 1 bunk bed, or 1 bed upstairs. And we had a lot of sheets. And the heat was all hot, radiant hot air heat. And we just worked beautifully as 3 families. And
did you claim a particular bunk?
Oh, yeah, we each had our beds. And the parents had found these fruit, I guess you'd call them crates. So we got to paint our own fruit crate, and in it we could put our PJs and our clothes on one shelf, and on the other shelf we could put a book or something. And so we each had our own bed up there, boys and girls together. It was not a problem. And in the night, when you went to bed at night, you put on a hat and mittens because, you know, if your head came out from under the covers, it was probably 35 or 40 degrees up there.
Wow.
So you got used to that. Downstairs it was warmer. But it was amazing how we melded together. We worked together. The kids, I wrote about it, that when we came up Friday night, we just went to bed. We were so tired. You get up morning, you go skiing, and everybody had to wait for the bathroom. So there was a 7:30 run to the mountain and an 8 o'clock car and a 8:30 car. So you planned which car you wanted to get in, and you had to be responsible for all your own gear. You know, nobody came back to get your gloves because you forgot them. But the most fun was the evenings there, Kathy, because the kids were fed early in the kitchen on a big 8x12 table. And then we had to do our dishes and set the table for the adults. And then we were basically told to leave the house until from about 6:30 or 7 to 9 o'clock. Just go outside. No TV. So we would sled down Brook Road to the village of Waitsfield or ski down through the pastures or go bother our neighbor and help him feed the cows. We thought we were being helpful. I'm not sure we were. But so we really learned a wonderful, fun Vermont life. And then Sunday night, we'd all pile back in the cars and head back to our schools in Concord, Mass.
Now, I know our producer, Tony, is so interested in the details because he lives not far from there. When you say you sled down to the village, or you slid, what do they call it here? Sliding?
Sliding, yeah.
Sledding was in my Jersey upbringing.
Yeah.
Sliding. How did you go from the back of your house? Because you're right on the common.
Yeah, well, with Brook Road is right there. So we just take the sleds over to Brook Road. It's very steep to start. And so you'd pile on sleds. If you had 2, it was better because you could go faster, more weight. So you pile on top of each other. And if the road were right, they didn't plow or sand it very often then. People, I don't think, had the four-wheel drives that they do have now. So they would go up the East Warren Road and come over the Common Road. Very few people drove Brook Road. So we never had to worry about seeing cars. And, of course, at 6:30 at night in the winter, it's dark.
Right.
So you could see the headlights way, way down the road. Or you could feel them coming upon you, above you. And so we try to get all the way past Tony's house. And we could get the momentum to do it. When we got to the flat, sometimes we had to drag the sleds a little bit, but then we just pushed them on down again to Jocelyn Hill Road, which then we had to drag them across the pavement or whatever, through the covered bridge. And there was a pharmacy called Seabright. Yeah,
in the basement of the old hotel.
Yeah. And so I don't know why, I think it was an outside phone or something, but we could ring on the party line and call our parents and they'd pick us up.
Oh, and they'd come down and get you.
Yeah, oh yeah.
When it was time.
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, you make it all the way down to the Bridge Street. What's going on Bridge Street at 7:30 at night?
Us. There was nothing else. Mehuron's was closed.
Yeah.
Of course, it was there.
I thought they stayed open Saturdays. I seem to remember.
I don't know if they stayed open that late. I know we had to go to Seabright to call.
Okay.
Seabright sometimes even had ice cream. I remember getting some there. So we could call from there.
Yeah.
But no, there weren't the skiers that wandering around as they are now there. So we was probably 5 to 8 of us wandering around with our sleds and our hats and mittens and our goggles. But total freedom. Nobody worried about us.
And you felt safe.
Oh, Wadesfield? Who couldn't feel safe here? It's just a wonderful village.
So your parents came and got you. Did you just fall into a heap? You were so exhausted at that point?
Oh, you got home and you got in bed real quick. No showers or anything. You were just exhausted. And you knew you had to get up in the morning.
Right.
To catch the early ride to the ski area. So there were no antics. And I said there was nothing you could do, no cell phones or anything, no TV. I mean, if you even wanted to try to read, the lights were pretty dim up in the attics. So you pretty much just got in bed. The hard part was when I started to get homework. How did you fit all that in to things? But, you just get a flashlight, read under the covers so you didn't bother other people, try to get your schoolwork done.
In those total freedom nights, what's the wildest thing that ever happened, or the scariest?
The scariest. Well, one of the things that we often did, which wasn't so scary for us, but it was for a guest. We usually had one guest. Mm-hmm. There was a haunted house down on Brook Road. I think it was where Chessa lives now. It was a house sort of like the one I read about, probably vacated during the Depression. Mm-hmm. And so you could go inside it. And in the house, there was a piano, and there was a chest with a wedding dress.
You're giving me chills, just the image.
So we would send somebody down ahead, and our friend from Massachusetts would say, well, we have to be careful passing this haunted house, because there's a woman who has been waiting for her fiancé for decades.
So you're creating Dickens.
Exactly. And so we'd get down on our sleds and get off the sleds, and all of a sudden the piano would start playing. And then somebody would flit by in the wedding dress. Our friends got so scared they started screaming.
Because there's no light.
No, she had a flashlight, though. She put it on her face as she walked by the window.
So she's got the wedding dress and then the shadows created by holding the flashlight from below?
I was a good storyteller. So that was scary for them. The only other thing that was scary was when we skied down, you sometimes get snagged on the barbed wire fences. Mm-hmm. And you didn't want to rip your ski clothes, but that you had to step over them or whatever. But no, we never ran into any animals or anything that scared us. Just a lot of laughs.
So that went on for about 3 years, right?
Oh gosh, 56 all the way up to 62.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Longer than I thought.
Yeah.
So talk about when your family decided to make a big decision about the house.
Yeah, I think every family has it. You fall in love with this place. And my parents did. And my father, he was 48 years old, and he'd had a heart attack, and his doctor said, you're not, your job's too stressful. You need to change something. So he was in business, and so he announced to the family in '63, we're going to move to Vermont. And so they bought the other families out and came up here and became a school teacher. And my mom got involved with the Valley. Some people remember Sally Hall as the town constable or school bus driver. And they loved it here. They had 30 years of just wonderful living. And my father, even for his first few years, would bike to Harwood.
Really?
From the house, yeah.
I mean, that was not so typical back
probably
then.
8 or 9, yeah. It was a long bike ride. But he was so happy to be up here. So I went off to Middlebury at that point. Yeah.
So I just want to tell the listeners that I just find it amusing that your father, who came and reinvented himself as a physics teacher, even in this day and age, physics teachers are pretty rare. You have to have a particular type of brain. And he taught my husband.
Oh,
and my husband
okay,
remembers
okay,
him very,
okay.
very. And your father really tried to get Tom to aspire to the highest level of education. Not, I don't think, fully understanding that, college wasn't an average thing in the Mehuron family yet, right? So just going to UVM was quite scary for him, I think. He wouldn't like that I use the word scary. Challenging for him. But the idea of applying to the Ivy League was, he just couldn't imagine himself there.
I could see that. But my father, I remember him talking about your husband, Tom, because he said, I've got a very special student who could go on, and he could go to Harvard if he wanted. Right. I can't say my father was disappointed, but he sort of hoped, because my father had gone to Harvard. He'd love to have seen somebody from the Valley go on to Harvard, too.
Yes.
He would have been very proud of that.
Well, now the next generation, our Thomas is a doctor, so it does come around,
there
right?
You go. So he's taking advantage of his
Right.
opportunities. That's great, yeah. And it was, I think my father spent years developing a PSS2 book, a physics book for high school kids. So in the summers, he would go all over America and work with other teachers and college professors on creating a textbook for high school physics that he was very proud of.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And some of the people who probably remember that, having the physics with him, but didn't know that he had actually written the textbook for that.
So now he's a writer, and this is intriguing me because the Take Me Back column is about to feature your sister.
Oh, cool.
And I was so stunned. I mean, I know you're a good writer, but I didn't think, that doesn't necessarily mean everybody in the family is. And her story is intriguing, and I call upon the listeners to read it because it's really very well done. Hers focuses about riding in the Valley and horses at that time.
Yeah, I mean, back up because she is 12 years younger. So when they moved here in '63, she was 6 years old.
Oh, boy.
So she does feel as if this is her home. I mean, not that I don't say it's my home, but I wrote in the column that I always felt, I don't want to say interloper, but I wasn't a native because I had experienced as a child in a whole other community.
Right.
But my sister really feels this is home for her.
Now, I'm trying to figure out, would she have started school at the old high school building, or was the elementary school built then?
You'd have to ask her. She's out in Park City now. Maybe you can fly her back for this interview. But she'd come. But she, I think that she was in the elementary school. She writes about the riding in the Valley. Her mode of transportation, instead of a sled into town, was taking the horse into town. And you could do that. You could ride all over Waitsfield on a horse.
Yeah.
And so she has wonderful memories of growing up here and lots of friends who stayed here.
So, all right, so you're here. You've come with a group. Now your father and mother are here full time. And remind me, what age were you when they bought the house? From the others?
Oh, 17. I was 17 then.
Okay, so you were almost ready to go to college.
I wasn't. I was going to Middlebury.
Okay.
And that's when I told you, that's where I got some very, very good training.
Yeah.
So I pretty much was out of the home at that point and wanted to be. I thought I could live anywhere and do anything at the age of 17.
Of course, that's when you do things.
That's when you do that. So I was off to Middlebury. But I would come home on weekends, and then when I went out to Mammoth, if I ever came back for a World Cup race, say at Cannon or up at Mount Tremblant or something, they would always come up and see me. So I got a chance to see my sister then. But we were more pen pals than anything else because I wasn't home much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a while, right? So you're still in the same house. So
Exactly.
we've got this big gap now. Take us through that. So you graduate. You're still racing intensely because you're at Middlebury. And so what happens?
In terms of where I go or what happens with the house?
Because I know you've lived all over.
Oh, good. Oh, Lord. So I would come back here, earn money, to go back out to Mammoth. Once I got to Mammoth, everything was paid for. And the best part of training out in California was when I turned 21, I could declare residency. And mind you, I discovered this. I could go to Berkeley for free.
What?
UC Berkeley for free because I was a resident because I was 21.
Wow.
And I'd been there 4 years. And so when I was finishing up with the ski team, it was a no-brainer. I didn't want to go back to Middlebury because I felt like I'd be the oldest person on campus. Mm-hmm. So I went to UC Berkeley, and you'll see, you heard a little bit of it. I got involved with the Vietnam War protest when I was out there in Berkeley in the late 60s. And so it was a great experience at Berkeley. So I was a Californian and studying out there. So that's when I finished up my academics. And I could tell you crazy stories. I think there's some in the book about the protest movement. And I'm researching it still now for the third novel. There is going to be a third to this one because everybody wants to know, does Leah go on to the Olympics or not?
Right.
And so I'm researching about the Vietnam War, too, because that's part of sort of an undercurrent in the novel, what was going on in America at that time, and how vehement the students were against the war. And I think history has proven them right, that it maybe was not the just war that we thought it was. Mm-hmm. So then, after I finished Berkeley, I met my husband, Peter Delfausse. I'd known him from Middlebury, but hadn't dated him. But we started dating, and I married Peter. So where does it go from there? Denver, Colorado. That's where he finished his training in medical school.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you do in Denver?
What did I do? I became a writer and an editor of a magazine called The Beverage Analyst, and I did graduate work in journalism and mass communications, and all I really wanted to do was write. And when you run a magazine, you don't get to do a lot of the writing.
Right.
You're organizing more and picking articles and photos. So after that, we came back to Hanover, New Hampshire, and I started teaching. First, I started adult education programs in Hanover, and then we went to Concord, New Hampshire to raise our family, and that's when I started teaching school. And so I taught school for 25 years in private schools and decided to try the college level, but quickly decided high school was where I wanted to teach. So I finished up my teaching there, and then we retired here.
So how many years did you teach?
I taught about 26 years total.
26 years.
Yeah. I taught American literature and journalism, mostly, and writing, and absolutely loved teaching the kids. And that's what started this book. I think I told you this.
Well, you need to tell that.
Okay, so at the end of the day, and everybody can nod their heads and say, yes, I understand this, the bell's going to ring at 2:35. Why they picked 2:35, I can't tell you. So it's about 2:15, classroom work is done. And so I've got a class that's scratching their heads and rolling their eyes. So I started telling them stories about being on the ski team. And all of a sudden they were just wrapped like this. They couldn't believe, first of all, this teacher had all these wild, worldly experiences.
She was young once,
She
too.
was younger. But what I was telling them, I was their age when I was doing these adventures, and they finally, after years, they passed it on to the next class coming in. These were usually seniors or juniors I was telling the stories to. Wait till you get to Mrs. Delfausse's class and try to get the end of the day. You're going to hear the wildest stories ever. And then they finally said, you've got to write a novel. You've got to write a story about this. So that's what inspired me to finally put it down on paper, to see their reactions and their love of hearing these stories. I said maybe there's something that for everyone to enjoy, get a thrill out of, and maybe inspire young girls to go take some adventures. You don't have to stay home. There's a world out there for you to jump into. And of course, I really like inspiring female athletes and coaching them.
And this is something Lee and I share in our writing, that we love to encourage young women to become the hero of their own lives. And our stories, it's a classic story arc for women's fiction, where the woman simply grows by confronting these different issues and events in their lives, becomes a deeper person, a better person in the end.
And I totally agree. I think of, I haven't read a lot of the juvenile fiction, but I think of The Hunger Games and Katniss Everdeen. And I think that's wonderful. She can be inspiring, but I can't relate to it. I mean, it was a dystopian world that I just couldn't resonate with.
Right.
So I said, I want to write a story that young people can resonate with, a life they could lead. So it's based in a historical time. It's based in a young girl with all the trials and tribulations of being a young girl going out on her own. And I wanted an unconventional girl who didn't feel like she had to follow the norm. She had a dream to be an Olympic skier. And not every young person goes home and says, Mom, I'm going to be an Olympic skier. So I wanted a young girl that sort of thought beyond the boundaries of what most of them were expecting of themselves. And I've gotten good feedback on that. Maybe young girls are starting to think I can escape small town life and go do something big.
Sure, because, skiing is one choice. It's sort of a metaphor, though. You can make a choice and you can pursue a dream. And that might include failure. But that even teaches you so much and propels you forward.
Oh, I'm a big advocate of failure. There is no failing as long as there's learning. And you just have to face that failure. We even know it in writing, Kathy. I've probably got a whole drawer full of rejection slips. And I cherish each one of them because it means somebody read my book.
I never looked at it that way. You're teaching me something.
They read my book and they had a reaction to it. That's all I want. And if it's not a good reaction, that's fine. I feel confident enough.
So let's talk about writing. Because even though you taught English, language arts, that doesn't mean you can just sit down and write a novel. Now, I'm saying this, I'm working on my 5th novel right now. I have had to seek out the coaching of editors. I took a year-long graduate course, and I wrote South Beach Drag, which is my 4th novel, within the help. But I had to keep putting before myself that it's not worth doing if the next novel isn't better than the last. That's how I've challenged myself. And I've never asked you this because I wanted to save it until now. So you made a decision to write a novel. How long did it take? What is your process?
Oh, wow. Well, the first one was 7 years. Yeah. But I could almost say 25 years. Because back up. Remember I told you I told the stories.
Yeah.
And I told them again and again, and every time I told them, I embellished them. And creating the story arc was another whole aspect. Obviously, creating characters is a challenge, and keeping track of the characters, that you must experience that too. I have pictures, I have lists of character traits, because I have to just remind myself all the time. What's the character wearing? What does the character look like? How does the character speak? So yes, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. The most important thing I think in writing is discipline. And that's never been a problem for me because, as I said before, even getting ready to go skiing is a discipline, keeping track of everything. So if you have the discipline, and that means doing it every day and doing it when you don't want to do it. I think that's when you really know who you are. Oh, I don't feel like writing today. No, you write today. And so sometimes it's a struggle because you don't know where you're going. Sometimes you can basically spend 3 hours and come up for air at the end of 3 hours. So it's a discipline. In terms of the story structure, I have in my mind's eye, and maybe sometimes even a little story arc, where I want the high points to be, what they're going to be, what the epiphanies will be for the characters. And obviously I want to know where the conflict and the confrontation is, because that's what drives a story. So I have in my mind's eye what characters are going to be villains, so I can prepare for that, and maybe you do that too. So discipline, maybe a mind's eye, dream of it, maybe even sketch out a story arc for the story. But then you just write. And Hemingway always said, writing is really rewriting. That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
So you write it, but then you have to go back and edit it.
Well, we have a little different trajectory as authors because you were teaching literature, right? You were experiencing that on a daily basis. And I was a math teacher for 40 years. People were shocked, really, when I published my first book when I was 60. But what happened was, just for those of you who don't know anything about publishing, there's this sort of joke, are you a pantser or are you a planner? And the pantser means you fly by the seat of your pants. Well, I can tell you the reason my first novel, Fading Past, took so long to write is because I was totally flying by the seat of my pants. And as I say, I've sought out training that can teach me things like the inciting incident, right? You already mentioned that you're planning out your high points. I wasn't. I was just letting it happen. And what that does is makes you throw away hundreds and hundreds of pages, because no matter how fabulous your paragraphs are or some cool sentence you throw in there, in the end, what is the story? That is what the reader wants to know. What's the story? And if you can't say the story in 25 words or less, you're not there yet.
Yeah.
So, I began to learn, and what happened is my brain took over and changed it into a mathematical process. So now I plan, I'll write, maybe a 50,000 word first draft, and then I'll say, all right, how many words is this going to be? And I know I need to place the midpoint shift right smack in the middle. And I just mathematically map it out and then go back and do what you're saying. Then I can go wild with the writing and just enjoy it, because I know I'm going to hit the marks, the story arcs.
Yeah. And then the other fun part of writing, and I think I've told you this, I write to music, usually Beethoven sonatas. So I find that while I'm writing, this is first draft, that the story progresses according to how the music's going. And so within a chapter, things start moving quickly, and maybe there's a adagio or something. And so I start writing faster. And then maybe there's a slow part of the sonata, and that's when I hover. Do you know what hovering is? Where you're taking just one scene and embellishing it and adding details and putting the character in a place.
Like in your reading, when you were talking about the stream and being like not a dragonfly. Was it a dragonfly that was?
Yeah, skittering up the stream like a dragonfly. And so you decide that's where you're going to hover. So you have to pace even the chapters, not just your novel. You need to pace it. And then how are you going to end it so the reader wants to go on to the next chapter? I tend to want to finish up some kind of, I don't want to call it conclusion, but some ending to the chapter that's positive. I'm not one to want to leave the reader hanging like on a suspense novel. Who's going to come creeping in the door. I like a different kind of resolution of the chapters, but I still feel the reader wants to go on. And you've probably experienced, I have 5 friendly readers. They're my friends. And I throw it out to them, and one of them has ADHD. And she is my litmus test for how fast the plot goes and the pacing of it. She said, I sat down and read your book in 2 nights. I said, yeah, okay. If somebody with your ADHD can get through it in 2 nights, right, I know I have a novel that will also move and that will keep the reader interested. So there are ways to test it other than just my own reading it. I throw it out to my friends.
We've talked before about, trying to assess the landscape of publishing at the moment, and we are recognizing that pacing is really important. Getting them to turn that page becomes more and more important. So does shorter paragraphs, even shorter sentences, right? So, for example, my favorite book is To Kill a Mockingbird, and I read it every 2 years.
Wow.
I don't think she could get it published today.
Interesting.
In this environment.
Yeah. Although Atticus Finch is often referenced.
Yes.
Everybody uses him as the icon of a lawyer. So, although I think it's banned too.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's banned in Florida.
I don't get the ban.
Yeah, but you're right.
Somebody will have to explain to me what's wrong with that book, because the intention of the novel is just so beautiful.
I'm not sure why I shouldn't throw that out, because I don't read the list of banned books, but I know that kids, that's the first thing they want to know. Is it banned? Then I want to read it.
I think that's right. Well, here's an interesting question, because in interviews, people are amused to find out that that we didn't have children's books in my house, right? And where I grew up, now this is a whole story. Like the GIs moved in, they built the church, and then they built their track houses where I grew up. And the church didn't have any money, so they didn't have many books.
Oh.
So what we did was we read our parents' books. Now, you're not Catholic. When you walked into Mass, there was a pamphlet of banned books. That was normal. Well, my mother had all of them.
Can you give me some of the names? Do you remember?
Yes, like Portnoy's Complaint. I remember The Godfather. I was a tween then. You know, and there was some stuff in there I shouldn't have been reading, but that's all we had to read. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good story. Yeah. And that. I
So
mean,
what did you read as a child?
I was a little more innocent. And I did have children's books. My father was a voracious reader. He grew up with Kipling. He often told us Kipling stories. So I read Kipling. My favorite growing up was one that probably nobody even heard of. It's called Green Mansions by, I think it was W.H. Hudson. And there was a girl called Rumi who lived in the forest of Costa Rica.
Ooh.
And lived on her own. And she swung from the trees and lived with the animals. And
Was it a picture book?
no,
or a
no, no.
chapter book?
This was a whole novel. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And that's what I mean. Go back to loving writing. When I was in 6th grade, I usually got my work done early in class. So I wrote a 300-page novel about a dog and his adventures. I read Albert Payson Terhune, and so I wrote mostly animal books. But the young characters were liberated. Mm-hmm. I didn't pick up Portnoy's Complaint.
Well, I shouldn't have either, but there it was. But it was on the top shelf, as if that was going to keep us from getting them, you know. So you're on your way to Italy. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's funny. This just happened last night. This is what happens to writers. You know, you go to bed, you're thinking about it, and I'm worrying about this trip, because I'm going over to celebrate a young woman, or no, a woman now, my age, Rosie Fortna, who grew up in the Valley. And she was adopted from Italy, and the Fortna family was well known in the Valley, Lixie and Trod. And her town that she was adopted from, Philadelphia, has decided to honor Rosie, because she was on the ski team with me. And she went on to the Olympics. And so I'm going to go over there and honor Rosie. I think we have 3 or 4 days of celebration. And I'm doing this because, first of all, I love Rosie, and I've spent a lot of time skiing with her, and now tennis. And so I woke up this morning and I said, there's a story there. And it can go into my 3rd novel, because the character in Snow Sanctuary, Carla, is actually Rosie. And remember I said a lot of writing is biographical or autobiographical. Right. So I said, wait a minute, there are 3 chapters in the next novel about Rosie going back to her hometown. She'll go back as a ski racer. That was her dream, to make the Olympics and be able to go find her hometown. So I'm going to get to live that with Rosie next week.
I'm loving this, and I'm really looking forward to the next book. I'm looking forward to hearing how the trip goes and how it plays into your writing. And I maybe after you're done with that book, we'll have you back on. And let's talk about it. We'll close that whole out.
We'll finish up the
full circle moment.
I do want to mention that writing, right now just 2 novels, but writing a trilogy is kind of fun. A, because the story continues, but B, not that I'm writing to make money, but if I sell the first one, I sell the second one, I'll sell the third one. So that's kind of fun, too. I'd throw that out to you.
People get hooked on the...
Yeah.
I know. I've been waiting to have people really want a sequel, right?
Okay.
And it's going to happen someday, and I'll probably go there. But we'll see. We'll see what the future brings.
Well, there you go.
And I want to thank you for joining us for episode 8 of Take Me Back, the interviews. I've so enjoyed having my friend Lee Delfausse here. And we'll have her back sometime in the future. Hey, if you folks know somebody that you really think I should be interviewing, because I don't, believe it or not, even though I've lived in this valley a long time, I don't know everybody, and I certainly don't know everybody well enough to just barge in and invite them to come on the show. But if you know someone, let me know. Tony's he puts my email, he tags that on the end of the video. It's kind of easy. It's marykathleen.mehuron@gmail.com. And that same email is in the column Take Me Back. On the back of the Take Me Back, an anecdotal history of the Mad River Valley. It's right on the back of the book because I just want to hear from people. And, you know, we don't have unlimited time to tell our stories. So if you know somebody who really should be recorded, give me a shout. Oh, we're in the phone book, too. We've had the same number for over 30 years. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
we'll see you
Kathy.
next time.
All right. Enjoyed it.